So the 2018 rent event is all about education, and there are some key issues happening at the moment that I can't wait to kind of explain to you here with our special guest. Thank you very much, Scotney, for joining us. This is Scotney Williams from Tenancy Practice Services. TPS work very closely with Ray White, and here today Scotney is going to be helping us with some information around some reform coming to the Residential Tenancies Act, which could affect for landlords how the use of their property. But not only that, there's the Healthy Homes Guarantees Act, which is also on its way, and that will affect the rules around the quality of the properties that you provide. But firstly, Scotney, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, my career in this arena started in 1985 when I was appointed the first regional manager for what was called Tenancy Bond, the forerunner of tenancy services today, at the Manukau office. And I was manager there for 9 years before I left, and set up my own private consultancy giving advice and documents to clients. And that nucleus of a service has been expanded over the years, and now we're a much larger firm and we continue to give quality advice and documentation to our client group.
Great, well thank you for joining us today. We've got a lot to talk about, so we'll get into it.
Okay.
So Scotney, one of the proposed changes that's on its way is the idea of this rental reform and changes to the Residential Tenancies Act. And from, as I understand it, there's sort of three key components. There's more to it, but there's three key ones that we're going to talk about today, or I want to find out about. One of them is around the use of, or ability for tenants to have pets at a property. The other one is obviously this removal of the 90-day no reason termination notice. And also finally, the idea around changes to abilities to increase the rent for landlords. We'll start sort of one at a time. Let's begin with pets. What are your thoughts on the upcoming changes in that space around pets?
Well, the proposal is that the legislation become more pet friendly for tenants. It's proposing to give them the right to have tenants, and that's possibly a great idea. It's just that pets come in all different shapes and sizes. So I think some thought's got to be given to allowing tenants to have pets if those pets were, for example, large dogs.
Yeah.
It's just not appropriate to have large dogs, and someone would have to look after them. They can't be left behind.
Do you see there being some sort of fairness and balance around the reality of pets and properties and damage they can cause, and do you see that coming through in the legislation?
Well, yes, because the proposals do acknowledge that the problem with pets is that they can cause damage, and there is already discussions around how to, as it were, provide landlords with some assurance that any damage will be met by the tenant. Classically, British Columbia, Canada's just started a pet bond. We could follow that, and possibly change the law that's currently in New Zealand about cleaning the carpets. Might also go a long way towards assuring landlords that they could recover the cost of damage done by pets.
Well, it's good to hear in your opinion that you think there will be some fairness and balance to the rules once they're finally brought out sort of early next year. That'll be great to see, particularly a pet bond, and a lot of landlords will be pleased to hear that. One of the other issues with the rental reform is around the removal of this no notice terminations for tenants. Can you tell us a little bit more about what may be on the horizon in that regard? Yes,
well, it's true that they're abolishing the no notice 90-day notice that doesn't have a reason, but they're replacing it, if you will, with a 90-day notice that does have a reason. And they've acknowledged that there's a problem in the law, that the reason property managers use the 90-day notice is because it's very hard to control tenants' bad social behaviour, and so they've implemented or put into the law a proposal, a complete subsection dealing with bad behaviour by tenants and how to control it. So you will have the opportunity when that notice is abolished to be able to control tenants' behaviour in a much greater and better way than you had before, and then the 90-day notice won't be so much without a reason, but a 90-day notice with a reason.
So that's good to hear for landlords, that they'll still have this ability to work through the process of breaching if required, issuing the 14-day notices, and then worst case scenario is still having a 90-day non-renewal notice to tenants. We just have to be a bit more transparent about the reasoning behind it.
Correct.
Perfect, okay, good. The third issue here with the rental reform is around the rent increases. How is that going to change the landlord's ability to increase their rent?
Well, it's not going to change it, other than the fact that the proposal is that the rent be increased only once a year. Now, I think we both know that the average tenancy in New Zealand is 1 year, so it probably won't make a huge difference, certainly to most property management firms which tend to use that model anyway. Landlords will have to make a change if they've been using 6-month tenancies, for example. But my view of it is that because the average tenancy is 12 months, putting the rent up once a year simply makes sense. So they'll simply have to plan their lives longer term.
And I see that, I mean, I've seen changes over the last sort of decade where lease lengths have kind of gotten longer and longer, and there is less and less of this 3-month, 6-month type of lease. And I know, I mean, Ray White, we manage 18,000 properties or so across New Zealand, and it'd be very rare where regularly properties are being increased in their rent any more than once a year anyway. So like you said, it's more just probably about a landlord considering long-term planning at the beginning of the process.
Yes, and they're going to have to start thinking about that now. And they're going to have to think of a different mindset altogether. I won't be able to rent it on a Friday and decide to change my mind and sell it on the Monday. It's just not going to be.
And we do
like
hear
that.
of that.
It happens. We both know it happens. Yes.
Well, it's good to hear your advice and your thoughts on that, because it's nice to hear that there will be some fairness and balance. And I think it's really important for landlords watching this to understand that there are changes coming, but they're not doom and gloom. It's just the new landscape, and it's not really going to change things too much for them.
That's correct, and that's the thing that really comes through with all of this amendment legislation. Landlords, certainly private landlords, when it does happen, they need to become familiar with it. And for those that aren't prepared to do that, rather obviously, they need to employ an agent to do it for them, because the compliance totality is now so great that you simply cannot afford to be a private landlord in this day and age and not know what's going on.
And that's where it's great, I mean, for us to have your support in tenancy practice services. So all our property managers, I know they bother you on the phone and ring you up all the time. They can seek advice and ask you for your thoughts on how to digest this, and I think a really valuable tool for landlords that many don't realise is part of our service. But it's going to be interesting to see how this all pans out, and thank you for kind of helping us sort of digest this a little bit.
Well, there has been a lot of legislation and proposed legislation come through again recently, as it did last year. So it's probably been busy this year as it was last year. So there has been a lot to look at, but it's all becoming quite manageable now, I think.
So it's not just rental reform that's on its way. We've also got the Healthy Homes Guarantees Act, which should be coming in potentially, or more detail around that towards the end of this year, early 2019. The Healthy Homes Guarantees Act is really going to affect the quality of properties, and rightly so. We need a higher standard of properties for tenants across New Zealand, but it's going to change the rules for landlords around key areas like heating, insulation and moisture particularly. I want to sort of go through those with you, Scotney. Again, we'll start one at a time. What about heating? How's the Healthy Homes Act going to change the heating requirements for a landlord?
Well, probably quite significantly. The proposal that government's published is that they want heating to attain a level of either 18 degrees or 20 degrees. They haven't made their mind up which of these two yet, but 20 degrees is probably the optimum figure, because that's the figure published by the World Health Organization that's best for both people as well as young, old and the sick. So if they were choosing between 18 and 20, I think the logical choice is probably 20 degrees. So the most important thing that clients need to know at the moment is that if they're going to install a heater, or the tenants want heat installed before these regulations come into force next year, then do so, but make sure the heater can provide 20 degrees would be my advice. Otherwise you might having to do it twice.
So on that note, because it's always tricky, you know, a landlord can provide heaters, but there's no guarantee the tenant's going to use them.
No, but that's the tenant's choice.
Right?
So I think the important part is to, first we just take a good look at the temperature and say, they'll probably go for 20 degrees, but how's that going to be generated, we'll say. What the government's proposing is that there be 3 authorised forms of heating. One is heat pumps, 2 is fluid gas heaters, and the 3rd is wood burners. Now those are the 3 preferred, if you like, tentatively authorised methods of heating. You may well be able to top up with 1 portable electric heater if the current heating that you've got doesn't quite do it on its own. The law's not quite clear around that yet. But the forms of heating that you will not be able to use are unflued gas heaters and electric heaters that are not heat pumps that are solid and attached to the wall, we'll say, and unflued gas heaters.
So, with the sort of detail around the legislation, I mean, do you have any expectation? I know you probably can't give us obviously a solid date, but from what you're hearing in the industry, do you know when we might find out more concrete details around exactly what the landlord's required to do in respect of heating?
Do you mean in terms of law?
Yes, yeah.
Sure. Well, I think they've got a tentative date to have most of that passed to be effective by the middle of January next year.
Okay, cool. So not too far away.
No, not too far away.
But something to keep in mind, obviously, for landlords now. The other part of the Healthy Homes Guarantee is obviously the insulation. So we have very clear guidelines and standards now around existing insulation levels.
We do.
Or what's required by July 1 next year, depending on where you are in New Zealand.
Yes.
Will that be changing? Do you see any significant movement from what is already in place?
I hope not, would be my answer. Government left the door open for them to consider the higher standards of the 2001 standard or the 2008 standard as compared to the 1978 standard, which is what's been used up to date. I think what the government will be doing now is comparing the cost and the benefit of changing all of the work, updating, if you will, all of the work that's been done and will be done up to July next year. And I'm hoping that they find that the cost-benefit analysis doesn't show that it should be done.
Yeah.
That would simply mean redoing all of the work that's been done. Well, not all of it, but a lot of it. Yeah. And that's just a huge amount of cost and inconvenience to landlords and tenants for not a lot of benefit. And the reason I say not a lot of benefit is you're going to have benefits in better ventilation, benefits in heating, benefits in draft stopping and moisture ingress. And I think if you add all of those benefits together, then you probably say with some confidence, then maybe we don't need to upgrade the insulation that little bit extra and go through the inconvenience that would be pretty significant for everybody to do that.
And you mentioned the moisture issue as well, because obviously we've got the heating component. We've just sort of talked about the insulation there and what may happen, and hopefully not too much. But with the moisture, that's the sort of third and one of the other components of this Healthy Homes Guarantees Act, and moisture ingress. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means for a landlord?
Yes, I can. The moisture ingress is referring specifically to the amount of moisture that comes out of the ground inside the subfloor area and percolates up through the house and goes into the ceiling cavity, condenses on the underside of the roof, and then drops down inside the ceiling cavity, often onto the ceiling. A lot of people don't even know that's happening, but it's happening in a lot of houses that were built early on in the piece. So the remedies that they're suggesting is ground cover over the whole of the subfloor basement surface, which is usually clay or earth, and that's pretty effective. That'll probably knock out 95% of the moisture from actually being released. A brand study done some years ago showed that up to 40 litres of water vapour per day can get out of the ground up to 1/2 metre deep and seep up and go through the floor to cause this moisture ingress. And the other remedy that landlords can start with if they choose to, or do it in addition to ground cover, would be to make sure that the subfloor ventilation is up to speed. In other words, there are enough vents in that subfloor area to let the moisture-laden air out of the basement area, the subfloor basement area. That proves to be quite problematic for all of the houses that have either a brick veneer at the bottom or are on a ribbon concrete base that the bricks are based on, because then to put ventilation in there, you've got to cut holes into concrete.
Do you feel there might be some exemptions in place for those types of properties like there are now for insulation, where it's just prohibitive to fill the space because of the type of building?
I can't be sure about that, but certainly if there was insufficient room to get under it to do the underfloor insulation, there might be insufficient room to likewise do the ground cover, which would be the ideal solution for houses that were needing that kind of protection.
So there's a lot of change happening at the moment. We've got multiple components with the Healthy Homes Guarantees Act. We've got multiple components with the possible rental reform. And in your opinion and with your experience with governmental changes and how they implement these for landlords, I mean, how do you really see this playing out? Do you see there'll be a sort of a fair balance for landlords to get a nice sort of mix between compliance and sort of reasonable sort of terms?
Yes, I do. And I can point to one example of that. When the proposal was published to get rid of the 90-day no-cause notice, what they did do is they definitely recognised that the reason property managers often use that is for trying to, where they can't control tenants' bad behaviour. So rather than try to go to the tenancy tribunal with these behavioural issues, which are fraught with difficulty proving and often difficult to sustain in the tribunal anyway, what they've done is they've put in a whole new subsection which talks about the tenant having to maintain, for the want of a better term, good behaviour. And it's quite extensive, including such things as just verbal abuse, which has never previously been in the law at all. So they've clearly listened to the market and to property managers who give them feedback on what they really need, and what they haven't been able to get previously is actionable remedies against this bad behaviour. So the trade-off, and I see that as a nice balance, is on one hand they're taking away the 90-day no cause, but they're saying we recognise why you used it in the past, so what we'll do is we'll say you have to have a reason, but as far as bad behaviour goes, here's this whole subsection which deals bad behaviour, and now you can use that as your reason to say, well, the reason we gave the 90-day notice was because the tenant breached this new subsection.
Great, so there does appear to be some sort of balance and fairness for both parties, landlord and tenant, in regards to these two new pieces of legislation.
I've read most of the draft legislation and the RTA number 2, which is in bill form, partly in bill form, and most of it seems to be pretty well balanced in my view.
Okay, great. So, Scotney, as we can sort of see, there's a lot of change coming, there's a lot of legislative movement here. For landlords watching this, what's your advice, and just how do they keep safe? How do they just keep up to date with what's happening?
The only way to keep up to date with what's happening is for them to find out information. They've simply got to know what their obligations are. The compliance comes with costs if you don't know. It's either that or employ an agent to help you, because they, like Ray White, are keeping up to speed with all of the changes, and they can provide the necessary advice and service to clients.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us today, Scotney. Thanks for being here.
Pleasure.
Great. Okay, well, there you have it. There's plenty of changes that are happening and plenty of more on their way. The key thing for all the landlords watching is to be up to date and be informed. Thank you again, Scotney, for joining us. And if you want more information, please just talk to one of our Ray White property managers. We are here to help.